Here we go. So folks can just mute your audio while we present. We'll be doing a short, about 30-minute presentation, and then we'll shift into some time for discussion around this idea.
Maybe if you have questions during and don't want to forget them, you can just pop them in the chat, and then we'll have them there, and we can either address them as we go, or we'll come back to them at the end.
Yes. So as we said, we are the Rich Earth Institute. I'm Julia Kavicki, our education director, and
I'm Arthur Davis. I'm our operations director, yeah, we've been excited over the last bunch of years. We've had a lot of interest from people and groups down in the Pioneer Valley area around what we do, and so we're kind of trying to just start some conversation and some planning work around what might be able to happen around urine recycling in Western Mass.
Yeah, we know many folks are already doing it at different levels, whether at the home scale or in other capacities, and we're really interested in exploring what community scale Peecycling could look like somewhere in Franklin County, and what ideas folks might have about how we could go about that kind of planning process together. So just to get us started, we're going to do a little bit of an overview of what Peecycling is, why we're talking about collecting our urine and using it as a fertilizer, and what happens with our nutrients in our watershed. And then we'll talk about specifically what our community scale urine recycling program looks like up in Brattleboro, Vermont, or in the Windham County, Vermont area. And then we'll go into what aspects to consider for creating a community scale Peecycling program for potentially somewhere in Franklin County, and what that process might look like. And then we'll have time for discussion for you to share your thoughts and ideas about that as well. So just to kind of take a step back and look at the big landscape of what's happening in our nutrients and our watershed, we often think about our current sanitation paradigm as a flush and forget system, where our sewer and septic systems were designed really well to remove organic matter and pathogens in our waste. And when functioning properly, they can do that. But they often still release a vast majority of the nutrients in our waste, along with other contaminants such as pharmaceuticals and hormones and microplastics and emerging contaminants that get combined from industrial wastewater effluent and sewer systems particularly. So what this results in is a situation of nutrient pollution in our watersheds. And specifically here in the valley with the Connecticut River, we're connected to the Long Island Sound watershed, which has really been struggling with nutrient pollution over the years and has made some progress in reducing that nutrient pollution problem, but there's still a long way to go in terms of helping to keep nutrients out of the watershed. And in particular, the Long Island Sound study has been dedicated to focusing on this nutrient pollution prevention problem, and has helped to fund some of Rich Earth's work up in the southern Vermont area for our work diverting urine and diverting it from the watershed. And this image here is a picture of sediment that has traveled down the river and into the Sound, but is a good kind of way to visualize what is also happening with the nutrients when they are released from our sewer and septic systems and travel downstream. So when the nutrients in our waste get to the Sound or other sensitive watersheds, they accumulate and end up fertilizing harmful algal blooms, which are an increasing problem worldwide as climate change and warming waters create more beneficial conditions for these blooms to occur. And these blooms then have a wide array of kind of ecological ramifications, including producing neurotoxins that accumulate in shellfish and deoxygenating the water that results in mass fish kills. So it's kind of not a great end scenario for the nutrients that our bodies produce, contributing to this pollution. So we picture this as part of what we call a linear nutrient flow, where at every step of the train of what's happening with our nutrients, there are environmental ramifications. So on the far end of producing the nutrients that we use to fertilize our agricultural systems, largely a vast majority of the nitrogen fertilizer that we use is produced through the Haber-Bosch process, which is a highly energy intensive process that contributes around 1 to 2% to global greenhouse gas emissions, and is increasingly susceptible to things like energy spikes and increasing fertilizer stresses for farmers in accessing affordable nitrogen fertilizers. And then on the phosphorus end, many people say we're approaching peak phosphorus and have this increasing bottleneck as our phosphorus nutrients are mined in geopolitically volatile areas and only available in certain limited quantities. So we use those nutrients extracted from these different processes to then fertilize the crops, which we then eat, and our bodies use the nutrients they need from the food that we eat to grow and function. And a lot of those excess nutrients actually end up coming out in our waste, largely in our urine specifically. So when we flush our waste into our toilets, we end up wasting a large amount of clean, potable water. We've estimated that every year, just for flushing urine alone, we waste about 900 billion gallons of clean water to send that waste downstream, which again is increasingly a problem as climate change creates more drought conditions in different areas in the US. And then that large amount of water and small amount of nutrients and waste travels downstream and contributes to that nutrient pollution. And in doing so, passes through wastewater treatment plants that are increasingly overloaded. And the report card that our wastewater infrastructure got recently was a D+ in terms of its capacity to handle the amount of wastewater that's being sent to it. So this is kind of many challenges with the current linear paradigm of what's happening with our nutrients. So here at Rich Earth and at many other places around the world, we envision reconnecting this line into a circle and keeping our nutrients in our communities and helping to prevent many of these different societal challenges that the linear paradigm has. We call this the completed food nutrient cycle. And we'll talk much more about how this works throughout the presentation. But I just here love to share the fact that Rich Earth is actually calculated. This is based off of a King Arthur recipe, no relation to our own Arthur Davis here. But every day, the average human body produces enough nutrients in our urine to fertilize enough wheat to bake 1 loaf of bread. And I just think this is a really nice way of visualizing the potential for reciprocity between ourselves and the land, where we can give the land what it needs to grow in abundance, and it can then in turn give us the nutrients that we need to sustain ourselves. So this is really kind of a part of the vision that we're working toward in terms of local food resilience. So here I'll just briefly spotlight a few different Peecycling projects and programs from around the world to give a bit of the context for this movement, or what some people call the circular sanitation movement. So one example, notable example in South Central Niger is a farmer-to-farmer education project that taught farmers using the World Health Organization guidelines for using urine as a fertilizer, how to reclaim their urine and grow more crops for their subsistence farming. And there are now 3,000 farmers, primarily female farmers in Niger, who are using their urine as a fertilizer through this project. And an interesting thing about this project is they, working with local leaders and local religious leaders, decided to rename urine Oga, which means the boss in the Igbo language. And this was a really useful way that ended up being really successful for helping farmers accept the kind of transition from urine being a waste to urine being a resource. Another kind of notable institution of urine recycling is through AVOG, the Swiss Institute of Aquatic Science and Technology. And this has really been sort of the grandmother institution of urine recycling research around the world and has sparked a lot of other research programs in other countries. And so they've been doing this for decades and have published many comprehensive research reports. And they also now have a spin-off company called Vuna that is installing building scale urine recycling treatment processes and producing a concentrated fertilizer that they actually sell on the market to gardeners, and have identified a market of gardeners interested in this as a bespoke urine product. You can see a bottle of their RN urine-derived fertilizer there. And then one other example that's sort of the newest kind of leading force of urine recycling around the world is in Paris, where the water agency there has actually identified the benefit of urine diversion for their watershed to such an extent that they now subsidize up to 80% of urine collection projects in Paris. And this is enabling a lot of new kind of larger scale, neighborhood scale, even urine recycling efforts there. So that's really been inspiring to see as well. And then, of course, there are many different organizations working on different aspects of circular sanitation across the US. And I'll just sort of be getting into what specifically we're doing at Rich Earth, but there are many different slices of this puzzle that are coming together, from regulation to portable toilets to agricultural research from across the country. So why focusing on urine specifically? It's kind of an important question to address before we get into the specifics of how it works in our program. As you can see in these charts, urine contains just a small sliver of the total volume that makes up wastewater, yet it contains a vast majority of the nitrogen and the phosphorus. So by doing a relatively small act volume-wise of diverting urine at the source, we can have a big impact on helping prevent that nutrient pollution in our watersheds and helping provide farmers with the nutrients they need to grow their crops. But you can see it also contains about half of the micropollutants. And what we mean by this is really the pharmaceuticals that come out of our bodies in our urine. So this is a question I'll talk about for the next couple of slides, just to kind of share some of our thinking about this as a potential risk and how we address it in our research. So when we think about that linear paradigm of our nutrient flow, it's also a linear paradigm of our pharmaceutical flow, where pharmaceuticals are also accumulating in downstream aquatic ecosystems. And when they get there, they have, similar to nutrients, a wide array of ecological effects, including changes to fish physiology and behavior and accumulating up the food chain. And they don't really have a great opportunity to break down in those water ecosystems. So this is kind of not a great paradigm for the pharmaceuticals that we excrete every day, whether through our coffee or other things people may be taking. So then when we reclaim urine as fertilizer in the circular paradigm, this can help protect those aquatic ecosystems, but of course raises new questions about the potential impact on soil, crop, and groundwater health. So this is a question that Rich Earth actually studied for 6 years in partnership with the University of Michigan, the University of Buffalo, and the Hampton Roads Sanitation District. And essentially what they found was that the pharmaceuticals are present in such barely detectable levels that it's not really a human health concern. They're very tiny levels in the groundwater and the soil, and in the crop tissue, the sort of statistic that they came up with to communicate the smallness is that you'd have to eat a pound of urine fertilized lettuce every day for 1,000 years to again get back the same amount of caffeine that's in 1 cup of coffee. And coffee, of course, is kind of the worst case scenario because it's the most common drug or pharmaceutical or compound of this kind in our urine. And another way to think about this is these levels are far below the levels for drinking water that California has set. So these are kind of levels that are kind of common background levels present in our irrigation water already. But it is something we're continuing to research, especially around the potential long-term soil health. If we have reason to believe it may be soil microbes who are helping to break down the pharmaceuticals. And so we have a new research project we're working on to look at the potential long-term effect of sort of doing that work on the microbes and soil health. All right, so now sort of shifting gears, we're going to talk about community scale Peecycling. And I think it's important to note here the difference between what we mean by community scale and home scale urine reclamation. So we have a whole separate education program about how to use your own urine as a fertilizer in your own backyard, which kind of has a whole different set of factors to consider. And you can check out our website for more information about that. We call it our Urine My Garden program. But we're going to be talking about community scale Peecycling and what that could potentially look like in Franklin County and what we do here in Brattleboro. We have, we've been operating this program for a little over a decade now, about 11 years in Brattleboro and also up in Bellows Falls now. And we collect about 12,000 gallons of urine every year through this program, which since 2012 has enabled us to conserve about 2.3 million gallons of clean water. And this is the first community scale program of its kind. While there are other programs in the US, this is the only one of this particular kind. And it's the platform for our research that we do, which includes both technological research as well as agricultural and social research, and then also our education.
And the gallons of water conserved comes from basically calculating the average flush and saying that we're not flushing that water in the toilet, or yes, that urine in the toilet.
Prevented flushes.
Prevented flushes, yeah.
So now we're going to talk about the 4 steps of what our program entails, from collection to transport to treatment, and then finally farm application. So for collecting our urine, we have 3 main ways that we procure our nutrients. The most common is through these portable urine collectors, which are basically a funnel connected to plumbing parts in a watertight fashion that connect to a jug that can be totally sealed off with a cap and brought to a central urine depot. And then we have home installations as well as public installations of urinals. and our portable toilet fleet that also helps us collect nutrients from events and farmers markets and things of that kind. And a big part of collection has been community support for this initiative and having community members who are willing to get excited about and be a part of something new. And so one of the things we're really excited about for the potential in Franklin County is the amount of community support and interest that's already there that is a huge component of making a program like this work. So specifically for our depot model of collection, we have these urine collectors that I mentioned, which we've actually recently started selling on Etsy to folks across the country who want to collect in this way for their home settings. And these can work in conjunction with with a nun's cap or a pea style, or different ways of collecting urine and putting them into the containers. And they have a ball pit ball that sits in the center of them that acts as a valve check to help prevent odors from being released. And we have some other advice on preventing odors in those collection units. But essentially, folks just bring them to our depot when they're full. We have a vacuum pump at the depot that pumps them out. And we have a logbook for donors to log their contributions, which is part of our annual piss-off competition, which we use to celebrate our most prolific donors, and have our piss-off award ceremony every year, which is always a good way to inspire more collection. And this is a cross-section of our depot, so you can see the tanks that sit sort of behind the wall outside of the user interface area. Is there anything else you'd like to share about this?
Yeah, let's see. I think, I mean, if people have questions later, we can. I'm happy to talk about kind of this level of stuff. But no, I feel like for the moment I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, one of the nice things about the vacuum pump is no one has to be pouring urine into other containers, and it minimizes any kind of potential contact there.
For sure, and also leaves the containers, without any residual liquid in them.
Yeah.
So as a user, it's actually a very easy system. People are often worried about that before they go, and then they are pleasantly surprised often in terms of how easy it is to use.
It's easy peasy, I like to say. So then the sort of more infrastructural investment way that we collect urine is through these installations that we've started offering for both private homes and local businesses, which largely entail these four main modes of installation. One is through a urine diverting toilet, which is a divided bowl toilet that separates the urine to a tank in the basement, and the back half can either flush or be connected to a compost toilet. And the Vostaman EcoFlush is the model that we install. Another model is dry composting toilets, like I mentioned, such as the Separate, or you can have a urine-only toilet. And our partners at Toilets for People actually have a small kind of in-bathroom model of a urine-only toilet that can be a nice sit-down option alternative to our urine collectors. And then we also offer for public bathrooms, we're currently able to offer waterless urinals as our installation option, which then also divert urine to a tank in the basement. Or we have in Vermont a permitted hand carry system with standalone collection barrels that can sit outside a resident's home with secondary containment.
One note on this, in Vermont, there's a couple of ways in which Vermont is different than Mass in this regard. One of which is that in Vermont, you don't have to follow plumbing code in a single family house. So a lot of these fixtures that aren't kind of like approved under the plumbing codes would not probably be able to be used in Massachusetts without a variance for using them. So that complicates things a little bit, but it's just like a good thing to be aware of. Also we've kind of gone through our own kind of state level regulatory process to have these kinds of systems installed both in homes and in public settings. And so that would be definitely a conversation to kind of get going on the regulatory side if this was something that folks in Massachusetts were interested in pursuing.
Yeah. And I think part of the reason why, as a first step in Franklin County, we're considering starting with just the depot model as our main area of focus, and then potentially expanding to something like this after that. These are some photos of a home pump out. You can see we have a urine transport truck, which just connects to the outside of a home and can pump out the urine from their tank that way. So then the next step on our 4 steps of our program is treatment. And we actually have a patent pending urine pasteurizer, which is the nation's first urine-specific pasteurizer, which treats urine according to the EPA requirements for biosolid treatment, and is what enables our process in Vermont to be certified as producing a Class A exceptional quality biosolid, which is available for use on any farmland in Vermont. And basically, the pasteurizer just heats urine to 80 degrees Celsius for 1.5 minutes using an energy efficient heat transfer system so that it roughly uses about the same amount of energy to pasteurize as one incandescent light bulb.
And just a note on this, we'll come back to this as well, but this is the other kind of regulatory, kind of thing to figure out in Massachusetts is kind of what it would take to have a more accepted ability to apply urine, in agriculture in Massachusetts. It's something that we have done in Mass in 2 towns, in Orange and in Northfield. We worked with the Boards of Health, and also a little bit with Mass DEP. But there's not really like a clear path forward, particularly on the statewide level, for this to happen right now. But it's part of what we're kind of interested in moving forward.
Yeah. And just to note that these pasteurizers are sold by Rich Earth's spinoff company, Brightwater Tools, which is developing them in conjunction with other treatment components as part of a building scale treatment system. So yeah, it's the Brightwater Tools pasteurizer. So then once the urine is treated, we can then apply it to farmland. I think I'm actually missing a slide here on the transport, but you saw earlier a picture of our transport truck, which pumps out the urine from homes and can bring it to our treatment center and then can bring it to farms where they can apply the urine. And we've had many different farm partnerships over the years, largely funded by the USDA's SARE program, Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, which has enabled us to explore different application methods and different crops that we fertilize. And one of the first earliest studies that we did was on hay yield, comparing synthetic fertilizer to urine fertilizer, and essentially found that urine can indeed have the same effect on increasing hay yield as synthetic fertilizer when applied at the same sort of nutrient proportion. Some other field trials we've done with farm partners over the years. This is one on sweet corn, where we urine fertilize some sweet corn. And just anecdotally, I can attest this is some of the sweetest corn I've ever tasted. I don't know if it was entirely due to the urine fertilizer or something else, but definitely was successful in producing a good corn crop there. And we're partnering with this farmer again for more trials. And then, as Arthur mentioned, we also have applied urine in Northfield at Yellowbud Farm, where they're using the urine to fertilize nursery crops for nut crops, so nut seedlings. So that's been a really exciting new partnership that we've done just this spring and summer. And then here at our research center, we also have what we call an anthrovermiponic system, which combines urine and worm tea in a hydroponic system to produce the sort of nutrient match that crops in a hydroponic system might need. And this is an interesting model that's advocated by the Dark Nectar Cooperative based in California, and kind of an intriguing model to think about for urban contexts where a lot of the nation's urine is held, and unlocking the potential for using that in urban agriculture, I think is an interesting idea. So then just very briefly, some snapshots of different things we know of happening in Massachusetts to shift our conversation from thinking about what Rich Earth does to what might be possible in Franklin County. So down in the Cape Cod area, which is a separate watershed, there's been a lot of progress and movement around urine diversion and urine recycling there due to the really significant nutrient pollution problems that Cape Cod has. And these are just some examples of organizations that have been involved in that movement, which really has gone on since the New Alchemists were active in alternative ecological sanitation options decades ago. And now there are many, many folks working to galvanize a program that can help address some of their challenges in conjunction with some other treatment options that are being explored. And then, of course, we know many folks in Western Mass have been Peecycling for years, or interested advocates for many different aspects of or corners of the valley. These are just some examples of folks we know of who have been working on this. There's a urine diverting compost toilet at Grow Food Northampton's community garden, which I had the pleasure of visiting recently. And then in years past, we've been able to, as Arthur mentioned in orange, apply some of our urine fertilizer in conjunction with the Garlic and Arts Fest. But really just a lot of interest that we've seen from the Valley in Peecycling. So we're just going to kind of shift into thinking about, if we were to get a urine recycling project going, what would be some different aspects to consider and community partnerships that we'll need to kind of nourish, enable, in order to enable this project to happen. So of course, the first one to think about is funding for starting such a project. And one potential for funding is through the Long Island Sound Studies Futures Fund, which, as I mentioned, funds projects that can mitigate nutrient pollution in the Sound, which on the Connecticut River, we are a part of that watershed. And so they offer a planning grant, which could potentially be a source of funding for bringing partners together to plan a urine depot, including a lot of the regulatory work and collaboration with regulators to find a pathway that would need to happen, which will be a substantial chunk of enabling a project to be possible. And so in doing this process, some things that Rich Earth could offer for pursuing funding would be collaborating on grant writing with a project partner, and then providing consultation and support for a partner-led project somewhere in Franklin County.
Right. Yeah, that's great. I think the main thing there is that we are wanting to support someone in doing this, but we probably, Rich Earth Institute itself probably wouldn't be able to be like the main kind of implementer of either a planning project or an implementation project.
Which I think is an exciting kind of moment in our growth, as we want more of these community projects to happen, for them to be able to be somewhat self-sustainable without them being totally run by Rich Earth, is a part of our vision for growth of this movement. So then some aspects to consider around the collection side of things, particularly for the urine depot, include figuring out what a good location for the depot would be, which is a huge thing to think about, including what kind of site would be a place that people might already be traveling to, so we're not adding a whole bunch of extra carbon emissions of folks driving their urine around the valley. So some ideas for this could be potentially a town transfer station, or some other kind of population or economic center where there's already a large portion of people traveling with, that could potentially just add their urine onto whatever journey they're taking. And then somewhere that has a high concentration of people who would be interested in becoming urine donors is another factor to consider. And then in getting a project going, a project partner could work with us around community outreach to get folks interested in learning about becoming a urine donor. So for the collection side of things, Rich Earth can facilitate the depot construction and train any staff that might be needed to maintain or operate the depot. And then we can provide our education and outreach material to project partners for the urine donor outreach aspect as well. And then we have those urine collection equipment that I showed earlier, our little jugs and funnels that we could provide for collection also. So then for treatment, I think one of the models we're thinking of is that a pasteurizer could live at the urine depot, so that treatment and the depot could happen at the same site. Another option is that treatment could happen at the site of a farm partner, which is just, another kind of model, so that there doesn't have to be a third treatment location. And so for this, there would need to be some kind of management plan for the pasteurizer and maintenance of the treatment process and monitoring. So Brightwater Tools, our spinoff, can sell a urine pasteurizer for a project like this, and Rich Earth can provide consulting for the pasteurizer operations and training on its use. And then for transport, it's important to think about how the urine is going to be moved from point of collection to the farm. This could be through a partnership with a septic hauler, which is what Rich Earth did for many years before we got our own urine transport truck, or it could be potentially through a farm partner or some other option. And so one idea is that for the first year of a program, we could transport the urine with our truck if it's only a few trips, and then after that, support having a separate partner hauling the urine from collection to farm. And then for application, of course, identifying farm partners who'd be interested in having the urine fertilizer to use on their crops. We know there are some farms in the area who might be interested already, but definitely finding a farm that would be near the urine collection is an aspect to consider. And supporting farmer education around this and obtaining the appropriate application equipment for the farm are factors to consider as well. We're actually in the process of creating a farm guide that could be useful for this purpose. And we can work with farm partners to determine what application method might work best for their farm. And then for running the whole program, it's important to think about some amount of staffing that would need to be involved in this project. And this could be from a collection of different community organizations that could help with different aspects, or potentially seeking funding for a part-time position that could do a lot of this themselves. But these are some of the things that I've kind of mentioned on the previous slides that would really need a person dedicating their focus on to help make sure the program runs smoothly. And we could help with training on all of those components. And then finally, a big chunk of what a planning grant, for example, would entail is figuring out a permitting pathway. Permitting pathways for community scale urine recycling are really unique to each state, and there does not yet exist a clear pathway for what this would look like in Massachusetts. So we and whatever community partners decide to hop on this process with us will need to collaborate with both the Mass DEP and also local town boards of health to figure out what kind of regulatory pathway could work for everyone involved. So we're going to shift into some discussion questions now, but before I do, I just wanted to flag we have this interest form that we're hoping folks can fill out to help us identify what level of interest and what kind of collaboration people in the area might be able to offer. So I'll just pop this in the chat, and then I'll also pop our discussion questions there as well. So you can have that, and please take that at your leisure. And then I'll also just flag that we have a summit coming up, which is our international gathering for folks who research and practice urine recycling around the world. And we're actually going to be having an in-person component this year in Brattleboro. That's in early November. So we would love for all of you to come if you want to see some of these components of our community program in person. That's a good time to do so. We'll be having a tour of our whole program then. So I'd love to bring us together to talk about some of these different aspects that we were flagging around what we might need to consider for having a community scale Peecycling program somewhere in Franklin County. And then of course, if anyone has questions or other comments you'd like us to discuss.
Sorry, I just...
Oh, our mouse has disappeared. There.
Sorry,
Yeah.
There were a couple questions that I just wanted to draw. Sasha had asked, I don't know if you're still here, Sasha, but you had
I'm here.
Yeah, about PFAs and such. And I just wanted to give a little bit of info about what we know about PFAs at this point. It's obviously a lot of this, the regulatory environment around PFAs is pretty new and still evolving. Even as the science is becoming pretty clear, as you said, that very small amounts do matter. So this year 2023 is the first year that we have been required by the state of Vermont to do PFAS testing. And we did not find any PFOS or PFOA in the urine that we sent in. We did. There were some PFA compounds, mostly short chain PFAs, which are more easily broken down in the environment. We did find some small amounts of those in the urine, but we generally did not find any of the long chain PFAs, such as PFOA or PFOS. And we provided those to the Northfield Board of Health as part of our getting approval to do this project this summer in Northfield.
Dana, did you have a question or comment you'd like to share?
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to say this was all really interesting and really educational. And I just went to your website and read the home fertilizing. And I actually have been using my urine to fertilize our gardens. We don't grow vegetables, but just, you know, our yard for about 2 years now. So it's interesting to read your tips. And I've especially been a little worried about the salt building up. But because I live in the Boston area, I've hoped that, yeah, the rains wash it out. So it was interesting to read your thing that probably because I live in Boston, the rains will wash it out. And then I also wanted to note that this is kind of weird, but I actually, like, one of my primary diet components is chocolate. And I noticed that since I've been doing this, all of our plants, like the colors just seem to be more red tinged. And so I just kind of wondered if you had heard it, if you've seen anything with types of food that people eat, like affecting, like, you know, I don't know, coloring of the stuff.
Wow, that's fascinating. I haven't heard about that specifically, but I do know in general, the higher protein diet you eat, the higher nitrogen content is in your urine. But that's kind of the main connection I know about the relation between diet and the urine fertilizer quality. But if you'd like to share what you've been finding in your garden, we have a community science survey that's also linked on our website. If you'd like to share what you've been seeing in your garden, we'd love to.
Yeah, thank you. I will check that, and then I'll check that tiny URL when you post it.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, Deb, I see your hand.
Yeah. Hi everyone. This is great. You know, we're longtime fans of Rich Earth and Peecycling, and I'm a new alchemist from way back, having worked there in the 80s. So, but I wasn't sure coming into this whether it was a great presentation. Thank you. And I wasn't sure coming in, you know, what your intention was from Rich Earth and capacity. So it's really helpful to hear. And I think as you've stated, and as we see here, it's clear that you don't have the full capacity to do it. You have the capacity to support if funding is gathered. So just a couple things just in terms of, you know, that come to my mind in regards to not only locations, but partnerships. And I think especially the staffing needs, you know, Massachusetts, as you pointed out, is not Vermont. And so the squeamish factor is maybe a little higher, and some of the policy regulations are also a little higher. I guess I really would like to continue to be part of this conversation. And the first thing that comes to mind is, I think, definitely the need for an experienced and committed, at least half-time staff person from the start to oversee it. I think the community organizations, and being one in Franklin County, I know we are already somewhat stretched with all the work we're currently doing. And I know Seeds of Solidarity would be interested in supporting, but we have zero capacity to take on too much more. So just a consideration, I guess, in looking for funding. I think not only you know, a reality check to have like a half-time staffing, at least a half-time staffing person that would help initiate and carry this project forward, but, you know, maybe to even make sure there was enough funding to think like 3 years out. And that just comes from a desire to see something really be successful and recognize that, you know, building an infrastructure, building a partnership, dealing with all the policy stuff to make it successful, I think requires a kind of a vision and a commitment a few years out from the start.
Yeah,
so that's just my thought, and it comes fully from wanting to see this happen. but also wanting to see it be, really successful.
Totally. No, I appreciate all of those thoughts. And I think, yeah, I mean, as Julia mentioned, I think Rich Earth, we certainly have the capacity to do a pretty significant amount of support. But I think that we can't be the main leads. And I think it doesn't make sense for us to be, because we're based up here in Vermont. And so we just can't be on the ground, as we're not there as much. But I think that we would certainly want to go out of our way to provide support that would be able to make it happen for someone who was interested. But obviously I think we have a lot of experience in getting one of these things off the ground, and I think we would really love to make that experience and knowledge accessible.
And I'd love to see it happen, can be part of the conversation. But I do think having, a designated person and recognizing that, it's going to take a couple of years to get it going, and doing it, at the speed of trust is important.
Definitely. I like that.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation.
Yeah. I see Janice's hand next, and then Mariah after that.
Hi, yeah, love the presentation. Thank you so much. Really well spoken and concise. So thanks so much. And I'm looking at your questions about location and also partnerships. And first one that comes to mind is Just Roots in Greenfield. They are on municipal land. They are really focused on leveling the playing field so that healthy local foods are accessible to low-income families, and they partner with the SNAP program. And they have a nice chunk of land, which very interestingly had been like, I forget what you called it, but like the farm where people who were broke the law or couldn't pay taxes or something, it was like a work farm for prisoners, more or less. And now they've kind of recontextualized it to be a beautiful community working farm. And they have a nice piece of land. They do wonderful community projects. They partner with the Stone Soup Cafe that provides meals every week. So they have a huge social agenda. And I believe they have a pretty good grant writer. And so I think they could be a really good partner. And the other one is just has a place in my heart because I've been a farm share member of Natural Roots for a long time. And, they're a wonderful community farm that doesn't use any mechanical equipment. It's all horse-drawn. And so they have a real respect and love for the land. Now they've just been decimated by the flooding, and they're doing their own fundraising, but they have a lot of support behind them. But I would say Just Roots would be a great first approach. And then my other thing I'm thinking about is I don't know if anybody in this Zoom has ever in the past gone to Pothole Pictures in Shelburne Falls. It's a community run film series that we stopped just, with COVID, and we're now starting up again. And the season that we could not have because of COVID, the first film is called The Biggest Little Farm. And it's a documentary about, a family farm. And we were going to, and I'm sure we still will, collaborate with local farms. And I thought you guys could come and have a table, or maybe even have one of the nights to present this idea. I think because it's the first film and people have been missing pothole pictures, there could be a really good turnout for that night. So if you're interested, which I'm seeing some nods from you, I would love to present this idea to the committee. Sure. The idea of having you guys, not only a table in the lobby, but having some presentation time before or after the film.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds like certainly an intriguing opportunity. Yeah, we'd love to hear more information about the dates and
yeah.
Thanks, Janice.
Yeah.
Mariah.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I know, so I've been working with Rich Earth Institute for the past couple of months, just kind of brainstorming these presentations to the local community in Franklin County, and trying to help them understand what challenges this would pose to municipalities and any kind of regulatory processes. And so one of the things that you brought up, Deb, about having a position to kind of move this along, I think one of the things that we've talked about is, could the lead applicant for a grant work in a position as part of that grant application, so that Rich Earth Institute isn't necessarily hiring someone new for this, but the lead applicant might be. And so that's like a really interesting concept that I've been kind of mulling over as we think about whether it's a municipality that takes us on as part of a transfer station, or I've seen a whole bunch of really great ideas like that Janice presented, and you've been putting ideas in the chat too, Deb, of different community partners. And so that might be an option too, is that rather than having Rich Earth Institute, hire a new position specifically for this, that whatever that lead organization, lead applicant is, could hire someone.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good point to raise, Mariah. And yeah, I meant to say this at the start also, but thank you so much for your help in the process of planning these presentations, and really grateful for your support there. But yeah, it's certainly, if we applied for a planning grant to help figure out some of the regulation for the first year, there could then be an implementation grant that we apply for after that, that could include, for example, funding for a partner to have a part-time staff person that Rich Earth could help, yeah, as you said, train, but not be held in-house at Rich Earth. Right.
Yeah, our experience with these Long Island Sound Futures Funds grants in the past anyway has been that they often like the planning grants to then move into an implementation grant, and those obviously have more funding because you're actually kind of getting something off the ground and putting the ideas from the planning period into service.
If I could also just add one other thing, which is presumably you all live in a local town, or it sounds like someone's from the Boston area, but I know that Julia put in, or is going to put in, the link to the tiny URL survey, but if a municipality considers doing this, or you want your municipality to be part of this, a really important aspect of that is telling directly the people who are in charge of those decisions, whether it's the Board of Health or the DPW or the wastewater department, that you have that interest, because this is a really lovely conversation to get this started, but without having directly communicated that support, any kind of request might fall flat. And so it's really important. I know that I'm a town planner in a very small town, and the loudest voices are the ones that get heard. And so, just oftentimes just an email or a phone call saying, hey, there's this really cool thing going on. I would love it if my town could look into it, or if you hear from them, seriously consider it. I'm a resident of this town and I support it. That goes a really long way.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well, Mariah. And yeah, I did just put the link, in addition to telling your towns that you're interested, telling us that you're interested, this is the forum to do that also. Yeah, Stacy, love to hear your thoughts.
Hi, thanks. I'll echo how much I've enjoyed the presentation as well. And I'm from the Connecticut River Conservancy, and we partnered a lot with Rich Earth also. And it's really exciting to see this kind of moving downstream. I was really excited that Mariah is here from a town, and as the chats have indicated, you know, with Greenfield being our biggest city in the county, have you approached the city of Greenfield, or invited them to these conversations? Is there anyone there who would be appropriate? I know it's probably not, there's probably not the right place, but I always think of Amy Donovan, and obviously she's solid waste district, but you know, is there some kind of tie-in there? And as Deb said, I was also thinking of Martin's Farm as a, I don't know, I guess you're talking about two different possible places, like the depot for the urine for the collection, but then the treatment would happen somewhere else, and then the farms that might use it would be others, right? Like there could be,
yeah, I mean,
obviously multiple players here.
A couple of different ways. You know, here in Vermont, what we've done, just because it's made sense, because we kind of have this whole facility where we are working every day. So it's made sense for us to do the treatment here where we are, where we're coming to work every day. Right. And we have, you know, we have the two depots that are out, and then we have, then we have various farms that we work with. But it could work also really well to have, treatment happening either at a depot or at a farm where it's going to be used. And then to Deb's question about Martin's Farm that was in the chat, if I can go up to that. There we go. Yeah, another use of urine that we've seen is with large scale composting, especially if they're doing large scale composting with a lot of brown material like leaves. Urine is a lot of nitrogen and really, little to no carbon at all. So you have, for it to work in a composting scenario, you really have to have a composting base that's a lot of carbon and very little nitrogen, so that you are balancing your carbon nitrogen ratio well. But we have there's some folks who have started doing a portable toilet program up in the Burlington, Vermont area. And their main offtake partner at a farm is mainly using it for composting leaves and creating a higher nitrogen leaf compost product. So that is certainly a possibility for sure, or something that a farm could potentially be interested in.
Yeah, and we did invite Amy Donovan and also folks at Martin's Farm to come to these conversations, and we'll certainly continue to reach out as we kind of proceed in this, what we foresee to be a relatively long planning process.
Yeah.
And to the question about the potential of fertilizer sales helping to fund the program, that's an interesting one, and one that we thought a lot about at Rich Earth. We actually only very recently, for the first time, sold some of our urine fertilizer to a farm partner, partly because of those spikes in the cost of nitrogen fertilizer that we were seeing as a result of the war in Ukraine and energy price hikes. But to a large extent, part of what's prohibiting us from selling our urine, for example, the way that Swedish company does in those little bottles to gardeners, is that the urine that we process through just the pasteurization really is still urine and not a concentrated and odor removed product,
right,
essentially. But it is something that especially our spin-off company Brightwater is kind of continuing to look into, and potentially in the future could be something that we explore, but not really quite where we are right now. Yeah. And so the main kind of funding angle is through the nutrient pollution prevention rather than the fertilizer sales, actually, which is kind of interesting to think about, and something that varies from country to country, actually. Yeah.
A couple more questions that came in the chat. Well, Mariah, thanks for pointing out that there's another one coming up next week. Yes. So if you know people who are interested, then let them know, please. And we'd love to have them come next week. Next week, it's also one that's at in the evening. Janice had a question about urine, keeping the urine diversion conversation separate from composting toilets and gray water. That's a very interesting question. Yeah, go for it.
Pull out the question, which is, we're working on gray water, and I have felt like it feels important to include urine diversion in this conversation about gray water, partly because there could be some infrastructure created through gray water, and why not have these things already incorporating composting toilets and urine diversion? So my question is, do you think it's too much for, a representative or, in trying to change legislation to include all three in a package? It seems to me they make so much sense all together, but is it too much, do you think, for the brain?
Well, here's my take, and I guess all I can say is that this is not a I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to this question, but my opinion, I think that getting gray water rules changed would be a really big deal, because the implication of that would be that someone, wouldn't need a septic system, right? And we get lots of inquiries from people all over the Vermont, Massachusetts, other places, who email us, who are interested in setting up a urine collection system so that they can, they're building a house and they want to not put in a septic system. In Vermont, that's also the case, that you can't do that because you need a septic system to have to deal with your gray water. So I think that is in many ways a much larger conversation regulatorily than doing urine diversion, because I think when you do urine collection and urine recycling, you're not needing, it's a simpler process in a lot of ways. We're basically taking out a very small volume, as those charts that Julia showed earlier. It's a very small volume of the overall water usage, and it has a very different, the gray water from a public health standpoint, from the perspective of a board of health in some town, that's a very different conversation, I think, especially if we're talking about taking out a very small volume, treating it to a very kind of a known standard, such as the treatment level that we're talking about with pasteurization. That's like a very known quantity in the kind of like wastewater public health world, and obviously there's other questions that people have, and other things to get over about it being a human waste. But I don't know, I think you could go either way, but I do feel like it could bog down the process.
And just on the sort of legislative note, I'll share that in Vermont, we've been a part of this working group that's been trying to advocate for some of these kind of like whole home solutions. And what we've done legislatively is we've been trying to advocate for the passage of a bill that would create a designated working group to then study the options for all of the tools and technologies that would need to come together to enable someone to have full on-site reuse and not potentially need a septic system. But the idea of creating a designated working group to then consider more options was what our legislator suggested to us. And I think potentially a useful route to combine all these different things we want to progress forward, but that aren't maybe quite at the level where we can just create the rules to enable them right
now. Yeah, Stacy had a couple of questions, one about sharing a budget, and then one about the depot as like a thing that could move around. at least in the way that we've done depots, I think that would be difficult. Also, at least in Vermont, we have had to get our depots, they're permitted as locations that are hosting, wastewater storage, basically, as far as the state regulators are concerned. So that might be that might be a kind of an issue with that. I think that porta potties would be kind of a better way to deal with big events, because that's what people are already used to using in those situations. So yeah, I think we haven't done garlic and arts in a number of years. We've kind of been expanding our business, our portable toilet business, mostly in this area. We've had talks in the past about working with the Green River Marathon and the Green River Fest, but certainly we're looking to expand our fleet, and so certainly, and also if we had more, it could be kind of a cool thing if we had if we did events down there where we're collecting a lot of urine, and there was a depot in Massachusetts. It would mean that we didn't have to truck all of that urine all the way back to Vermont, which
right. So it sounds like even if you could get all those porta potty systems going, we'd still need a local location for all the treatment and
yeah, I mean we could also truck it back to Vermont and deal with it in Vermont, but it would be kind of nice to have that be a possibility to be kept more locally. And then your question about a budget, that's like always kind of, it's a difficult thing, and I think it would be a good thing for us we do have some numbers and we can try to look at what that could be like, but I think that the problem is that it could look like so many different things, and I think probably a big part of what a planning process would look like is coming up with what would make sense in the community down there based on siting and kind of the organizational structure of partner organizations, and a lot of those things I think would inform more clearly what kind of operational expenses would look like, what that would look like over time.
Is there a upcoming deadline for that Long Island Sound planning grant that you're trying to drive us towards?
Yes, I would have to
I don't know
double check. I believe late fall, but I'd have to double check. Actually, I don't know that off the top of my head.
It's also an every year
yes,
thing.
It is an annual.
Once a year?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I'm going to have to go pretty soon, and maybe others, but I guess I'm wondering, where do you want to go from here? What are the next steps that we can think about doing?
Yeah. Well, I think for one, taking that or filling out that form, and then we'll go through a process of reaching out to folks who filled out the form and maybe having individual meetings and brainstorming further what potential different collaborations could come together for creating this grant.
And I think if you have other ideas in terms of other community organizations or individuals or people who work for town government, starting those conversations outside of us as well, it is great. And encouraging people to come maybe to next week, but also we can schedule other conversations as things maybe start to kind of gel a little bit and people have ideas about what might make sense.
Yeah, and as Mariah said, talking to different local towns will be a big part of that. And then Deb, I love the idea of having a Franklin County contingent to come to our summit. We would love to have folks come up here to see some of our stuff in person and also have a chance to connect. We're workshopping the idea of having some kind of watershed specific World Cafe or breakout component of the summit, which we'll share more information about as we develop it. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We'll send a copy of the recording and some of the resources mentioned and links to the form in a follow-up email to everyone. And of course, feel free to invite folks to our second one next week at 7. We're so glad to hear all of your ideas and have you all here with us today. It's so exciting to start this conversation with you all. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks a bunch.